Reunion. First, George, I want to thank you for agreeing to sit down with me.
Thank you.
And what we do here is I just start off with, well, your life before the Army. What were you doing when the war started, and what were you doing when you went in the Army?
Well, I was working at a defense plant. I had bounced around earlier, working in a foundry and working for farmers and so forth, but I finally got a job in a defense plant.
Okay, what part of the country were you in?
From Illinois, Decatur, Illinois. But I was from a little town, probably 14 miles south of Decatur. The population is 813. And I got my call to be drafted, and I was still working. And I was riding with my father, who worked in the same plant. And we were riding with some other guy that was driving us, and I got in the car to go to work that morning, and I had received my notice, and I told my dad, I said, I'm going to be drafted into the service October the 9th. And my dad looked at me and said, tonight? I said, no, October the 9th. But anyway, that was the beginning of my notice to go into the Army. So I was inducted, and I went to Camp Camel, Kentucky. No, first of all, I went to Scott Air Force Base. Received all my shots, my uniform. They put me on a train, and I didn't know where I was going. And we was on this train, it seemed like 3 or 4 days, and I thought, we must be headed for the West Coast or somewhere far off. We ended up in Camp Camel, Kentucky, which was only probably 300 miles from where I started at my home. But what they did, the train would stop and pick up other recruits that were going to the same place. And then they'd go for a little bit and stop again. And that's the way we ended up at Camp Camel. We were probably some of the first soldiers in at Camp Camel, Kentucky. It was a brand new camp. There was no landscaping, all mud, brand new barracks. And here we are, so I was assigned to C Company, the old 56th Armored Infantry Regiment. So I went down for an interview at a field house when I got there, and after the interview, I had a duffel bag with the rest of my clothes in it. They put a tag on there that said 56th C Company, 56th AIR. I thought, wow, I'm in the Air Force. And I finally got down there, and it was Armored Infantry Regiment. But I went into the orderly room, and there was probably 30 guys in a small room, and my first sergeant was trying to check them in. And he was having a problem. So he says, can anybody in here type? And I said, I can, Sarge. So he said, get down behind that typewriter. And in 15 minutes, we had him cleared out of there. And I was his buddy from then on. So I did a lot of his paperwork and stuff like that. But anyway, he told me that if I could work in the orderly room for him, but I would only be a corporal. He said, if you go out into the line part of the company, you can get a higher rank. So I decided to go out in the line. And that was my beginning of the service days.
Now, since you were there from Camp Campbell on, you probably went on the Tennessee maneuvers.
I was on Tennessee maneuvers.
Any stories or things stick out from there? I've gotten a couple so far.
I don't recall. It seems like maneuvers lasted a couple months, I believe, and it was field problems every day. And it was, I believe we left Camp Campbell something like September, and we was through with maneuvers in November, I believe, and went to Camp Barkley, Texas. And other than just regular routine field problems, I don't think anything special happened.
Okay. So tell me about getting to Camp Barkley and the Texas environment versus what you were used to already.
Oh, it was hot down in Texas, but at this time of the year, we went down there in November, quite a bit of rain, and it was pretty cold. We were out in the rain, and then we'd get a little bit of snow, and we trained there for, I guess we went down there in, I believe, we went in November of 1943, I believe. And we started training there. And I believe I was corporal by then. I got promoted buck sergeant, and I went home on leave. And I believe it was in the month of December. I believe it was still in '43. I came back from leave, and they had promoted all the buck sergeants to staff sergeant, and I was staff sergeant squad leader at that time.
Okay, now, of course, from Camp Barkley to going overseas, Camp Shanks, New York, and the trip overseas.
Well, we got the ASTP fellows in. I was squad leader, and I got Charlie Fitz, no, not Charlie, a fellow by the name of Duncan, who was later killed riding on the back of a tank, Glenn Toy, and Steve Checker. They were all in my squad. And Clyde Bowman was my half-track driver. And we went to Camp Shanks from there, and landed in, I believe, somewhere around Le Havre. I believe in Le Havre. No, we were supposed to land in Le Havre, and I think it was torn up so bad we couldn't. And so we went wherever, to Northport or something like that. That was my first experience with England. And from there, we crossed the English Channel. We were at Tidworth Barracks, I guess, for a couple of months, and crossed the English Channel, and we're in the little town of Anglersville, and that was our first experience of being close to the front. We weren't there yet.
Now, in the infantry, your job as a squad leader, were you a rifleman or a leader?
Well, I was a squad leader for a while, but I didn't want to really get into this, but I got a little problem with a couple of officers, and I was reduced to the grade of private. And my assistant squad leader was Ollie Brown, and later at Steinwall, we were making an attack on Steinwall. I would have been right there where Ollie is, and he was killed. So I guess it was for the best that they asked me where I wanted to go, and I went over to Sergeant Bricks's mortar squad, 60 millimeter mortar squad, and I first met Charlie Fitz in that mortar squad. And Charlie and I became good buddies, and we were together from then on quite often. And Charlie and I were, we went up to attack Steinwall Woods, and Charlie and I were real close together.
Now, Steinwall Wood, of course, the Battle of Herlisheim.
That's right.
And tell me about your experiences there, what you remember.
Well, we left a little town of Niederschafersheim at 3 o'clock in the morning, I think, to make the attack on Steinwald. And there was snow on the ground and cold, it's probably 0 or below. And we got up there, and as soon as we got up there, machine guns opened, and we all hit the ground. And we laid there till probably 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And every once in a while, the machine guns would open up on us, and I couldn't move. Every time I moved my head, they'd splatter machine guns fire at us, and it would hit the ground. The machine, I must have been in a defilade because the machine guns were bouncing over my head. And Charlie was right behind me, and after every burst, I'd say, "Charlie, are you all right?" He said, "Yeah, I'm all right, George. How about you?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "I'm okay." And then we'd lay there a while, and the machine guns would open up again. If one of us moved a little bit, the machine guns would open up. But luckily, they missed us. But we laid there until 3 o'clock. I heard some somebody talking, and I finally looked up and I saw Sergeant Callahan was just talking to a German soldier, and I thought right away, my thought was, I didn't realize at that time that he was talking to the German. I thought he was up there that we were going to continue our attack on the Germans, but when I got up and looked, he was talking to the German, and I figured we were prisoners of war. And then Charlie and I planned on laying there till dark and getting out, but as luck would have it, we didn't make it. And the Germans took us across the Rhine. It seemed to me on something like some kind of a barge that I remember going across. I could hear pigs and chickens, and so I figured they were hauling these back into Germany from France because their food shortages are real short. And so we crossed the Rhine River in the middle of the night and marched a couple of miles. They took us in an old country schoolhouse, seemed like a two-story building, and they interviewed us there as prisoners of war. And seemed to me we were an upstairs room, and they'd take us one at a time down, and we'd talk to a German colonel, and he'd ask us. He knew everything about us. We didn't really have to tell him anything because he already knew who we were and what outfit we was in and all that. And we got interviewed there, and overnight, we stayed there overnight. Next day they marched us out of there back into Germany, up through the Black Hills, I believe it was. And we marched a couple of days, and then they boarded a train and took us into a little Stalag 5A. We were there, I guess, we had no food, hardly any. Maybe we'd get a piece of bread in the morning and a bowl of soup in the evening. And this was an old cavalry barracks. And we were there maybe a week. And we discussed, us guys get together and discuss this, and we had train rides. We'd get on trains. I had too many train rides, they said. But anyway, they put us on a train at 5A, and we went to 11B, which was a horrible camp. Every nationality was there, and it was overcrowded. I guess we were there a week or 10 days, and from there, they asked for volunteers to go on a work detail. We had no idea where we were going. And so Charlie and I and Paul Rice and Luke Scott all volunteered. We got out, we got right in the, and they picked about 100 or 125 of us, and they put us on a boxcar. We did not know where we were going at all. They took us up to Hanover. And I remember we arrived there early in the morning. We were on a boxcar, just an overnight ride, what I remember. We arrived early in the morning, and there was a German guard, had high, shiny boots and pistols on his side, and he was screaming and hollering. We couldn't understand him, and he was trying to count us. And he'd go down the line, ein, zwei, drei, and he'd count. We were lined up in threes, and he couldn't get the right count. It was supposed to be 125. The guys kept moving around the column. And he got so mad, and he's screaming at us. Somebody yelled at him, called him a Dodger, and we nicknamed him Dodger from then on. But he was in charge of our group. And we were living in an old schoolhouse. It was a big schoolhouse. We were living in the gymnasium. And I believe we only had one blanket. We were sleeping on straw mattresses. And we were assigned to work detail to go up to a gasoline refinery. They called it a benzene plant. And it was probably 6 or 8 miles from where we were, our gymnasium, where we were being housed. And they would take us about a block up to the corner and put us on a streetcar. And it was like a cattle car. It had slats in the side, and we could see out. And the Germans would stand and look on the sidewalk and look at us and, Americana, Americana, the first Americans they'd seen. And so they took us over to this refinery, which was probably maybe 5 or 6 miles from where we were building it. And we would sit there and clean the border off of bricks of the bomb belt buildings all day long. And the air raid sirens would go off. That meant the Americans were coming over to bomb. The guards would say, we're going to the air raid shelter, and we would get up and run. After we learned where the shelter was, we would beat the guards to the shelter. And they get mad at us. They say, I'm responsible for you guys. You don't be getting ahead of us. So then we'd go back to work, and we'd no sooner get to work, the air raid sirens would go off again. We never knew when they were going on. But they'd probably just be going over Hanover. They wasn't bombing us at that time. But they did come over and bomb Hanover one night, but we were in our billets. I got an allergy, and my eyes are running. But the night that the British came over and bombed the refinery where we were working, we were riding a train to work for quite a while until the bombers came over. They put us out in trenches. When the bombers go in, they lit up the city of Hanover just bright as daylight, and then to drop their bombs. Well, next morning we went up to where we got on the streetcar, and the tracks were all sticking straight up in the air. So we had to walk to work from then on. So that went on for probably, well, we were captured January 16th, and I guess it was sometime in early April that we were marched out of there where they headed us north. We could see the war was ending.
So tell me a little bit about your life after liberation and after being freed.
Well, I'll tell you when we were liberated. Mm-hmm. We had marched for, I guess, 3 or 4 days, and we got to we were a little town of Celle, I believe it was, in Germany, and we walked maybe several miles on the other side of Celle and came to a farmhouse. It was locked in a barn, and this was Friday the 13th, April 13th. We were in this barn. Next morning, the Dodger got us up, and we had these guards with us, and he opened the barn door and says, "You guys are free." And so we lined up. We went in the farmhouse, and got a bed sheet, put it up in front of us, got out in the middle of the road and lined up in a column of threes. And we had heard small arms fire to the west in the back of us. And so we headed that direction. We knew that's where the probably Allies were. And we probably walked a mile or so, and we see this big tank right in the middle of the highway, the road, the country road. His guns were aimed right at us. And we kept going toward him. And we got up there, and they recognized that we were prisoners of war, and those guns raised right up. We took off running. And then from there on, we jumped on trucks, and they took us back to an airfield. And we was there, slept on the ground, I remember, a couple of days, and planes were coming in, unloading supplies. They put us on a plane and took us out. And they took us to camp, at least I went to Camp Lucky Strike. And from there I was processed, given good clothes, and deloused. We had lice all over us. And I was put on the USS General M.C. Meigs and headed back to the States. But I thought that was a real incident that I was on a ship called MC Meigs. Colonel Meigs was. This was it was named after, I believe, a relative of his. There was a military family that I think they're from somewhere around the Civil War. But anyway, I landed at Newport News, Virginia on my mother's birthday, May the 15th, 1945. So that's basically, that. You said after the war you want to know?
Yeah, tell me a little bit about what you did after the war.
Well, I bounced around. I went back home, and there wasn't many jobs to be had. I really worked at a defense plant before, building a defense plant. So I believe I worked for a farmer a little bit, and I tried to get into college, going to under the GI Bill, but I applied at Milligan University in Decatur, Illinois. They were full. They weren't taking any new students. And so I finally went to work for a farmer. He run a corn sheller, shelling corn. And I did that for a while. And first of all, I guess I was getting a little ahead of myself. When I went home from the service, I was still in the Army. I had a 60-day leave, I believe. And after my leave, during my leave, I married a girl that had dated before. As a friend of our family. We knew their family, our family knew them, and I got married. And so from there I went to Miami Beach, Florida as a recuperation. Then I went back home from there and was discharged in the Army. And excuse me. Now I will skip back to where I guess I fooled around different jobs and finally went to work for the Signal Corps, the Army Signal Corps. I worked for them for 7 years, and in the meantime I had married, had 2 boys. And the oldest boy was born in 1947, and the youngest was in 1949. I went to work for Signal Corps. I worked 7 years, and I didn't really like what I was doing. I was in administrative, worked in property accounting. So I applied for a job with a public utility, Illinois Power Company. I worked for them for 32 years. And retired from there. And I've been retired for 25 years now. I'm 88 years old. So that's about it.
Well, sir, I want to thank you for agreeing to talk.
Okay. I didn't do very good, but
trust me, you spoke volumes. It was brilliant. Thank you.